Well, I'm super excited and honored to be here. I know that my Jewish learning is a source I use all the time, so it's exciting to kind of see myself as almost a my Jewish learning source. I'm also super excited to be having this event about this book that I've spent now years on, and helping folks understand what the point of it is and what came out of it. So I want to start out by saying that um, the genesis of this book began in March of 2020, just as COVID was starting. And I was asked to do an event with Corinna Gore for a convention for Reform rabbis. It ended up being online instead of in person for obvious reasons. And out of that came this book. Corinna wrote the forward for the book as well. She's still a wonderful colleague and friend. But the ultimate goal of the book for me was not just to get people more involved in activism for our global health, for the health of our environment, but to help people see Judaism in a new light. So that's really what I'm going to be talking about today. And so now I'm going to start screen sharing. Oh, weird. Okay. Sorry. In the past, I've been able to share from my iPad, and I can't right now. So I'm going to need a quick second to fix my settings because this was not what I was expecting. I'm sorry, everyone. So I'm just going to get started. I'm going to try to multitask here and get started as I figure out how to fix my issue. So I begin the book. I wrote the introduction to the book, and I begin by talking about the relationship between humanity, God, and the earth, and where that stands in our wider tradition, because our tradition actually isn't as ambivalent about it as you'd expect. The tendency is for folks to assume that Judaism is all about the idea in Genesis 1 that humanity was created in order to, let's say, one of the words used most frequently is dominate the earth. But that is absolutely not the case. The word that is used there, that gets translated as dominant, is often used with regard to responsibility as well. So it's not just that we have total control and total say over everything we do with the planet, but instead it's that we are a ruler insofar as sorry, I'm still trying to get this working. I'm so sorry, everyone. Insofar as we are capable of upholding our own responsibilities with regard to the earth itself. All right, so it's just not going to look as good as I had hoped, and again, apologies. Here we go. So I begin with a perhaps little known midrash from Pirkei to Rabbi Eliezer on the beginning of Genesis. And it says, when God said, "It is not good for man to be alone, I will make a helpmeet, Ezer Kenegdo, for him," the earth heard this. So in this midrash, the earth is personified. The earth has a personality, and she trembles and quakes, crying out, sovereign of all worlds, I have not the power to provide for the multitude of humankind. So the earth saw in this moment the reality that humanity could overcome the earth, that humanity could become too multitudinous and too demanding of the earth to for the earth to be able to sustain us. And this text, keep in mind, this text was from thousands of years ago. And God said, we together will feed the multitude of humankind. And they agreed to divide the task between themselves. The night was for the Holy One and the day for the earth. And what did God do? God created the sleep of life so that humans lie down and sleep while God sustains and heals them and gives them life and repose. And the Holy One supports a human being with the earth, giving it water, and then it yields its fruit and food for all creatures. So God supports both humanity and the earth supports both God, connects God and humanity is supposed to, in turn, as we read further into the Torah, work to do work, avodah, for God. That's the word used for sacrifices in the Torah, and avodah for the earth, which is what this book ultimately ends up being about. So I began my book focused on theology, because I think that's as good a starting point as any, and B, I think that it's necessary to understand the theology of God, humanity, and earth to understand how we're supposed to even be in the world. So one of the things that was most important to me about this book was that it would have a multitude of opinions and viewpoints in it. So I tried to have a diverse collection of people. And so throughout this presentation, I'm going to be showing you chapters, the chapter headings and the authors of those chapters, because this is an anthology. It's a collection of many essays from many different people. So one of the people that was most impactful to me in wanting to create this book was Rabbi David Mevorach Seidenberg. And he wrote A Natural Jewish Theology, God's Covenant with the Earth, for the theology section. But each one of these titles is one of the chapters in the theology section of the book, just to give you a sense of what's in here. And he wrote in his book in his essay, to create a sustainable world, we'll need to plumb deep to understand how Western civilization, carrying along with it so many cultures and other civilizations, arrived at this point spiritually and psychologically. What assumptions were made about the earth, about human life, about other creatures, about God? What did we human beings ignore or minimize in order to aggrandize ourselves? And we Jews must also ask, what stopped the Israelites and later the Jewish people from fulfilling the mission to transform civilization? So his background is one of Kabbalah and a Kabbalistic approach to Judaism and the environment. But as you can see here, we have academics, we have other mystics, we have even a contemporary midrash trying to help guide our readers as to the multitude of ways they can understand themselves as Jews in connection with God and their environment. So the next segment is about Jewish texts in general and focusing on the way our Jewish textual tradition relates to the earth and how we can maybe even reread it in light of our contemporary ecological perspectives to understand ourselves in relation to our historical texts with a hint towards ecology. So as we scroll down here, we've got another series of essays, and these are actually some of my favorite because they begin to actually address where the rubber hits the road with the book and with our own understanding of Judaism and nature. So this first essay is an excellent essay about the fact that there is no word for nature in classical Hebrew. The word teva which is used in contemporary modern Hebrew, is not a classical Hebrew word. So there was not even a concept of nature in classical rabbinic Judaism or in Israelite Judaism, which shows us that that idea that we would conquer or have dominion over nature doesn't actually make sense in the way that we think of it today. The second one, the second essay here is about the second paragraph of the Ve'ahavta, which is all about what will happen with relation to humanity and the earth if we follow the mitzvot or if we don't. And some of you may know that in the Reform tradition, the early reformers cut this paragraph out of the prayer book. They decided they didn't cut it out of the Torah, but they cut it out of the prayer book and cited it was a primitive view to how humanity and God and the environment work together. But we're seeing today that in fact human behavior and human action actually can bring about human suffering when it comes to the environment. So Rabbi Lynn does a really great deep dive into it. Rabbi Elizabeth Bahar teaches about how Jeremiah can teach us about how to respond to climate change. And to me, this is one of the most powerful pieces in the book and addresses one of the core issues I wanted to address with this book, which is climate grief. I'm not sure if all of you have heard that terminology before, but it's something that many people have experienced, which is by acknowledging the reality of the shifting climate and the shifting environment that we are experiencing, we are going to have to grieve the passing of the world we once knew. Things are not going to be as we knew them when we were younger. As we can see in the world today, climates all over the world are shifting dramatically, whether that be the fires in Canada or the horrible flooding that occurred in Pakistan months ago. It's not uniform. It's not simply one shift occurring everywhere. Depending upon where you are in the world, your environment is changing. And it could be radical and it could be slow. But either way, that change and that shift can bring about grief for the individuals experiencing it. And so what Rabbi Bahar is addressing here is Jeremiah's response to the destruction of the temple and how we can use that as a response to the grief we may feel with climate change. Dr. Goldsmith wrote an essay about how Jonah's mission can teach us how to best organize our communities for change and how to approach that. Rabbi Gold's section is about how to use the Song of Songs, the biblical book, as a source for chanting to connect us to our environment. Because as you may know, the Song of Songs is full of beautiful natural imagery that connects humanity and God, and is viewed traditionally in the rabbinic context as a love poem between God and humanity. So using small segments of it to chant and connect ourselves to God and the earth is a point of her essay. Rabbi Rumpf's essay is all about doing Shabbat outdoors when she was working at a camp, and how to use the Psalms and other Shabbat rituals to give ourselves an opportunity to find the divine in Shabbat. And the final two are a little bit more creative pieces. The first one is connecting Yotzer Or, the prayer said during Kriyat Shema in the morning, more directly to our experience of nature. It's a retranslation. And the second is a reflection by Adrian Levine, a teacher of Bible at Hebrew Union College, on the way the book of Job presents our relationship to the natural world and how it should teach us a sense of humility. One of the pieces I wanted to share from Elizabeth Bahar's book, or her essay that is part of this section, is the book of Jeremiah was written in response to a specific event: the destruction of the temple and the loss of the southern kingdom. Today, we are in the midst of our own global crisis. The book of Jeremiah offers a model to inspire in us the courage to listen to climate scientists and to encourage change. We have an opportunity for the weeping prophet to help us mourn the loss of the world that was and transition to a new reality of what is. We've been through 2 sections of the book so far. I'm going to check the chat to see if there are any questions I can address right now. And you can feel free to put questions in the chat. I will address them later. So Joe Red wrote a question that I think I just addressed, which is to use the book of Jeremiah, because Jeremiah was highly pragmatic about how to address the kind of horrors of the destruction of the Southern Kingdom and the temple. So thank you for that question, Jeremiah. Great. Yes, lots of, actually, Elia, you asked Jill Hammer. There are 2, she's the only person I gave 2 essays to in the book because of how powerful her writing is. Benjamin Robinson, I will come back to that question at the end because it's a big question. And the illustrations on the slides are not included in the book. They were, I used an AI to make them for this event. So the next segment is encountering the divine. So it kind of blends the first and second segment insofar as it's about how to actually engage with God in nature. So people either sharing their own experiences of that or how-tos to really spend time in nature with a Jewish-based spirituality that will open you up to the divine. So we've got another Jill Hammer piece here, Elia, and it relies on her most recent book, Sefer Yetzirah, which is a translation of an ancient text with a contemporary commentary. The first chapter is Rabbi Eric Abbott reflecting on his mountaineering and his climbing and how that has given him a connection to understand how mountains are sacred spaces throughout the Bible. The most obvious is Mount Sinai. We also have Mount Zion, where the temple was built. Rabbi Eli Herb wrote a chapter about Hitbodedut, the Hasidic practice of going out into nature to commune with God individually. And it is it's both a mixture of his own experience and a how-to, which I think is very helpful. Mike Commons, Rabbi Mike Commons, has written extensively and led extensive trips into the wilderness from a Jewish perspective. And so this is kind of a summary of his experience in the desert in particular. Rabbi Michael Bernholtz talks about his experience with composting and how that gave him a new sense of sacred time through nature. And it's also a bit of a how-to. And Rabbi Adina Allens is actually a very, to me, a bit of a groundbreaking piece because she combines therapeutic techniques that she learned from her mother with art therapy and Judaism in this piece, not just in a reflection on how it works, but in a how-to. So most of these are actually highly practical essays, which was again one of my main concerns with this book, so that people could come away with new ways of connecting themselves to Judaism and nature. Infinite Love is a retranslation of Ahavat Olam to encapsulate also our relationship with nature. The Story of the Pizza is a wonderful little kind of contemporary Hasidic story from Rabbi Joel Mosbacher about his relationship with his kids around where food comes from. Rabbi Daniel Wiener and Rabbi Avi Fine both wrote together about taking a hike on Shabbat and how that can be very impactful. And Rob Watson, who is the founder of the lead what's the word I'm looking for? Standard, the lead standard for building, which is the universal standard for green building in the world. Also happened to be a congregant at Temple Emmanuel, and a good friend of mine. His wife, Peg Watson, was integral in getting me involved in Jewish approaches to climate change from the get-go. And he wrote about his own experience with Tikkun Olam and working in a community garden. And then Dee Fischler Herman shared a poem, Ferns. The next segment is about sacred time itself. So the calendar, the Jewish calendar, as many of you probably know, is not just it's not just pins on a year for our holidays. Our holidays are all also related to the environmental shifts of the seasons in the ancient Levant. So we can't really understand the full meaning of our holidays without being connected to the shifts of the seasons as well, because all of them are also seasonal holidays. Our ancestors that established these holidays were deeply, deeply rooted in their contexts where they were, both culturally and ecologically. So this segment of the book is about how to find that reconnection now that so many of us have fallen out of connection with the patterns of the seasons, because we've built homes, we have air conditioning, we buy our food at the grocery store rather than farming it, most of us. And climate change is occurring. So these norms that once would have happened sometimes may not be happening in the same way as the seasons shift. So the first piece is an absolutely brilliant piece. It blew my mind. I loved it. It was not what I was expecting. It's from the Dean of the Rabbinical School at HUC in LA, Rabbi Devorah Weisberg. And it's all about how there was a conversation, and it's in the Talmud, about when to declare the new month. That was something that happened all the time. It was one of the main roles rabbis played in the Mishnaic and Talmudic world. But there's a conversation in the Talmud between rabbis and a bunch of shepherds. And there are different ways of approaching knowing when the month had changed and when a year would need that new month. As many of you may know, there's a kind of a process called intercalation in Judaism for the Hebrew calendar, in which every so often we get an extra month for the year. And the extra month has to do with, according to the shepherds, the nature of the season, whether it is getting warm yet or not. But for the rabbis, there's a whole kind of process that has to go into it as well. And the combining of these two overlapping approaches to our relationship to nature just leads to this very beautiful essay that Rabbi Weisberg wrote. The second one is about reinvestigating ancient rituals and trying to make them alive again today. So Kohenet Shmira Bahira, her English name is Sarah Chandler, gives us a new way to approach Sukkot based on the ancient water rituals done around the temple at the time, and also provides us some guided meditations for Tu B'Shvat to help us embody the feeling of sap rising once again, which is what Tu B'Shvat is celebrating, the kind of thawing of the trees. Nigel Savage, the former CEO and the founder of Hazon, wrote about the Shemitah, the practice of laying fallow that comes from the Torah, that every 7 years, the Israelites had to allow their fields to lay fallow, and then every 49 years, they had to declare a complete reset of the economy. So he investigates this is how we might do that today in a less agricultural-centered world. Rabbi Shoshana Meira Friedman wrote a wonderful piece on what it means to create a local lulav. We all know the traditional lulav comes from the species of the land of Israel. But if we're not living in the land of Israel, what does it mean to also show respect to the species that proliferate around us, and to create perhaps a secondary lulav out of those? Rabbi Dennis Sasso wrote a piece about how Birkat Hamazon, the prayer that is said at the end of each meal, actually reflects on the way that the environment provides for us. And Rabbi Gila Kahn reflects on Yom Kippur as a possible Jewish Earth Day, reframing it to understand how tshuva may be necessary for our own relationship to the world and how that relates to Yom Kippur. Warren Stone wrote a wonderful prayer for Tu B'Shvat. And we have a collection of essays from these wonderful youth leaders, teenagers who have been leading in the Jewish youth climate movement, about how they got into this, why they're so passionate about it, and what they want to see happen next. And then we have our final section, which is contemporary responses. So ways in which we today can respond using contemporary tools and contemporary mindsets from a Jewish perspective to the challenges we're facing. So the first is by Rabbi Mark Wachowski, who had been the head of the Reform Halacha process for a very long time. He teaches at HUC. And the idea of creating a new form of halakha that is specifically addressing the environment and our relationship to the environment. Professor Alon Tal talks about the way in which Zionism used a focus on the land and cultivation and changing the land as part of what it meant to come and settle the land. The third is from Daniel Delgado, who is currently a rabbinical student through the Aleph program, and is a writer, and he's of Quechua descent, and wrote about ecology, anti-colonialism, and how galut, the idea of us being in exile, is actually helpful for us understanding our relationship to the environment. Rabbi Shmuley Yanklowitz is a very powerful speaker and thinker, and he talks about his work in global interfaith activism around the planet for the environment. And then Rabbi Dean Shapiro wrote one of my favorite essays called Beit Atid, Synagogues as Laboratories for the Future, in which he calls for synagogues to not only be houses of gathering, houses of prayer, and houses of study, but also places where communities are coming together to think about how they can create a future for themselves, for their children, and for the wider culture they're working within that is more grounded in a collective. I'm going to read a segment from it. Synagogue leadership must create a structure that allows them to lead not only this generation, but also generations to come. Synagogues are seeders, and that their choices radiate into the wider community through families and businesses, into neighborhoods, and through the Union for Reform Judaism from congregation to congregation. Let us produce and exchange knowledge for the good of humanity. Let us store up grain now for the hardships we know that will happen. So it's using our synagogues to be those places that will make the radical change necessary for our Jewish community and our wider communities. We get some reflections from Rabbi Jonathan Blake and two of his congregants about how they achieved zero waste at their synagogue in Westchester. It's a very large synagogue. And then a collective work by Rabbi Daniel Fink and his daughters, Rosa and Tanya, about sustainable eating and eco-justice and how the Jewish tradition can give us a grounding for that. And the final essay is one that I also love very much by Rabbi Jessica Rosenberg about indigenous land acknowledgement and how we can do that in a way that isn't just kind of a throwaway moment where we say, for instance, I am coming to you today from unceded Lenape land. Me saying that doesn't necessarily do the Lenape people who have been exiled from this land for many, many generations now. It doesn't do them any good for me to say that. What it does is it should be a reminder to me to actually be in partnership with those peoples and supporting them and supporting the process of getting them repatriated to their ancestral land. And Rabbi Rosenberg, takes a Jewish perspective on that, which I think is very powerful. And so, in conclusion, this book is more than just a series of reflections. It's also a series of guideposts for how to live a Jewish contemporary day that will allow for a future in which the Jewish people are adding not just to our own numbers and our own future, but contributing as a blessing to all of our neighbors and all of our people that we live nearby and the communities we live nearby, to sustain as we go through these inevitable changes that are already upon us. So I want to thank you for listening to my review of my book, kind of. I hope that you'll consider purchasing it. You don't have to read every essay. If there's one essay that popped out to you, it's worth getting the book, reading that, and then maybe skimming around. It's available on Kindle, on Amazon, and also in softcover. But I also want to, whether you want to buy the book or not, fully up to you. I don't get kickbacks for it. But I want to make sure that I talked a lot. So I want to give you all a chance to talk a little bit, to share some reflections, some comments, questions, or rejoinders to anything you heard me say. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. I'm going to check the chat for any questions that may be in there. Great. So yes, someone shared a piece by Rabbi Ellen Bernstein. She was one of the primary movers in the Jewish ecological movement. I would say she was definitely the first person to put together a book about it, and is a core teacher and thinker in this. I had a question about climate change having been happening for several billions of years. Of course, the climate's always been changing, but it has, scientists have proven without a doubt that the Industrial Revolution and the impacts upon the environment by human use of oil and coal that creates carbon dioxide, and an extreme amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere is leading to extreme climate change that is not happening in line with how the climate has changed in the past. I know this because Rob Watson is a scientist that has based his entire career on these facts, and I've learned a whole lot from him. Let's see. Ooh, David Goldstein, thank you for that wonderful question. I love Spinoza, so I'm so glad you asked about Spinoza. And one of my dreams in the future is to kind of reinvestigate and re-engage Spinoza's theology for today. The key to Spinoza's theology is that the separation between thoughts and materials, the thought realm and the material realm, like the physical world that we engage with, and the thought realm in our head, the idea that that is split is an illusion, and that it is a product of humanity's own lack of capacity to put those two together in a perfected way, and that God is everything all wrapped together. And so we need that sense of splitness to be able to have self-awareness. And to me, if we can engage even a little bit of that thinking to understand ourselves as not separate from each other and not separate from the world, but all extensions of the same essence, which can be called God, we can rearrange our own thinking to hopefully act more in union with the world around us, as opposed to in opposition to it. So I hope that answered your question, David Goldstein. Greta Unger, did the process of editing this book challenge any previous teachings, beliefs you had about Jewish eco-theologies? If so, which ones and how? I wouldn't say it necessarily challenged. Well, it depends on how you say challenge. or what you think challenge means. It certainly pushed me to work harder to understand from a historical perspective and a historically text-based perspective how we can re-engage our tradition's connection to the land without throwing away the hundreds of years of um, scholarship and thinking that has been done in the realm of modernity. My next big project, prior to and maybe Spinoza will have a part of it, I don't know, is to figure out how the modern thinkers, particularly those who led to the reform movement, can still be used today, even though they lean so heavily on the ideologies of their time, including the human exceptionalism, colonialism, nationalism, all these things that we know have been extremely damaging to the world and to other people. How we can separate those parts out in order to get the token, the like content that was powerful about what they did, and still use it into the future. The exact title is The Sacred Earth. Here, I can, or Mira, would you mind putting the links in the chat, please? Yes, thank you. Talk more about Tikkun Olam. Sure. So Tikkun Olam is there's actually, some of you may know, some of you may not know. Tikkun Olam is actually kind of this like flashpoint issue in the Jewish world right now, because there are Jewish folks on the right saying that folks on the left have made too much of Tikkun Olam, that it's an invented idea that is not core to Jewish thinking. Rabbi David Murach Seidenberg, who I quoted earlier, wrote an amazing piece tracing all of the ways in which the phrase tikkun olam has been used for the past 500 years in Jewish thinking. So that idea is complete nonsense. Tikkun olam literally means repair of the world, or repair is also maybe not the best translation. It is almost augmentation of the world. And what it is often used to mean social action when people say it, but in its roots, it comes from a Kabbalistic viewpoint in which there was no difference between ritual action and ethical action. And they were two things that needed to be tied together like this in order to make sure that we were lifting up our own divine mandate that is given in the book of Genesis to protect the world and to work within the world. And so that is core to Jewish thinking, insofar as all aspects of Jewish practice, all mitzvot, can be seen as tikkun olam, because a mitzvah is us reaching out to connect with God. And the way that I view this, and the way that I think that the way that liberal Judaism should start shifting its talking about it a little bit, is that even the ritual mitzvot, even the things like prayer or like lighting candles on Shabbat, they do something to us internally. Ritual is a language, and ritual allows us to speak to the divine through these prescribed methods of behavior. And it then allows the divine to speak back to us through that same ritual. So when we light a candle to just look around, or for whatever reason that has no divine aspect to it, we're not doing a ritual. When we say a blessing and light a candle and perhaps cover our eyes, we are taking on a mode of communication with the divine that will change us, even infinitesimally, to understand our connection to the world around us in a more sacred manner. And so that also contributes to tikkun olam, because by changing that aspect within us, we will change our behavior externally as well, and hopefully change our behavior to meld better with the world, as opposed to be in opposition with the world that has led to our circumstances right now with regard to climate change and environmental disaster. So that was a lot, Lars. I hope that was helpful. And if it was only confusing, feel free to ask another question. Helen. Yes. So Helen Block mentioned that a modification of habits is necessary. Absolutely. And I think that ritualization is the best way to modify habits, because ritualization allows for mindfulness. And so not only should we green our synagogues, be more mindful of when we're driving, trying to figure out how to use mass transit rather than driving, all of that, doing that in a way that is ritualized will help us be more effective because it aids in habit forming. Ritualization aids in habit forming. And in fact, our relationship to the world around us that focuses on our need to change these habits is one of divinity. And that's why I started where I did in this talk with a midrash about our relationship to the earth and our relationship to God and our relationship as a nexus between God and the earth. It's one of divinity. So it's not simply just that we are scrambling around on this planet trying to eke out a living for ourselves. And so we need to change our behavior so the planet doesn't shift so much that we can't survive anymore. It's actually a divine obligation upon us to be in relationship with the world around us. Ken Rosenstein, yes. Feel free to look me up on social media or go to my website, rabbiandykahn.com, where there is a contact page. Okay, so Avi Calhoun said that he writes environmental justice policy in Virginia, or she, I'm not sure, or they, went to Tel Aviv University to study conflict resolution and believes in working across the aisles, but it's really hard because some do not even think climate change is real. As someone who works in politics wants to be guided by wisdom before personal gain, how do you think, or why do I think the book would say to someone like them? Actually, the essay on Jonah will be very, very helpful. That's what that chapter is about, is exactly what it means to help change minds, and the process to go through to help change minds. So it's specifically about that. The other thing I think it can teach you is to give you different language to talk about it. Although this book is from a Jewish perspective, I do think that the vast majority of folks who are denying climate change are primarily Christian. But those types of Christians often have a lot of respect for Judaism, Jewish theology, and Jewish thought. So helping them see why this isn't just a secular issue, but it's actually an issue related to the book of Genesis, which is also their book, and also can help provide them a new window into their own holy book, because so much of this book reflects on the Tanakh, on the Hebrew Bible, which is shared scripture. Maybe another language to reach out to folks across the aisle who you don't have to convince them climate change is real, but you can use it to convince them that they're responsible for the world, and they're responsible for not being destructive with the world based on the Bible. Yes, I know that Bjorn Lomborg is trying to deflate the alarmist perspective, and I actually, I'm responding to Joe. I actually agree that the alarmist perspective is not helpful. Alarmism just makes people shut down, right? It makes people stress out, freak out, and shut down, and not know how to react. To me, the goal is to change us internally, which was the focus for this book, to give us tools to figure out how we can relate differently to the world around us rather than freaking out about the world around us. Because in my view, the ship has mostly sailed. Climate science basically says the ship has mostly sailed. Change is upon us, change is here. We all see it. And we've been seeing it. That's not to say that we're all going to die. I mean, we all are going to die one day. That's the human condition. But we're not all necessarily going to die from climate change. It's not going to destroy everything tomorrow. But what we do is figure out how to live positively in relation to the planet to keep us from progressing this even further, and to just figure out a way to sustainably live our lives so that future generations aren't dependent upon the same things that are not renewable for our lifestyles. Let's just take climate change out of the equation altogether right now. Oil and coal are not long-term plans for how to maintain our lifestyles. We're going to run out. It's going to stop being economically efficient to use them. Even if you don't believe that they're changing climate, I certainly do. We need to figure out ways, thinking hundreds of years into the future now, that don't rely upon these non-renewable resources. Judaism has always been focused very far into the future. There's a wonderful midrash about a sage who is viewed as one of the wisest, most godly connected sages in the Talmud, seeing an elderly person planting a carob tree. And carob trees don't give fruit for a very, very long time, the edible fruit for a very, very long time. And he asked this person planting the tree, why is it that you are planting this tree when you're not going to live to see the fruit? And the person planting the tree says, well, when I was born, there was carob for me to eat. And I want for there to be carob for the future generations that will come after me to eat. So I'm planting these trees now, knowing that they will need it. And we need that perspective as Jews today for all aspects of our world and the future. And there's going to be a bunch of more events. I'm doing podcasts. We have another event on July 12th, which will be some of the thinkers from this book speaking as well. Keep an eye out. See, are there plans for an audio version of the book? Not that I know of, but I don't see why not. Let's, Rabbi Annie, I think you're here. If the CCR Press wants an audio version, let me know. I can read it. It'd be fun. Cheryl, thank you so much. That's very kind. Does Judaism speak about the end of the world, and how does that affect our views on climate change and mankind's future? Lars, you got the good questions. You're coming with the heavy guns. I appreciate that. So yes, Judaism does talk about the end of the world. And that actually relates to how I was talking about the mitzvot and Jewish practice earlier, that the end of the world happens when Moshiach comes. And I saw your message. And that happens by Jews behaving properly. And this brings about 1,000 years of peace and prosperity for all people all over the earth. Climate change, I don't think really falls into it. Like if one wanted to be an eschatologist and an apocalypticist about it, they could say, yes, this is a sign that we are moving away from the right modes of being and need to readjust our behaviors in order to bring ourselves back to right modes of being. And that's the only way in which we will see that 1,000 years of peace come about. That's my best answer. Saying more about our ethical obligation to all life, human and more than human. Yes, I can say that. So this actually goes to Spinoza as well, and goes back to Rabbi David Mubarak Seidenberg, who wrote a whole book on Kabbalah that focuses on this. I'm answering Ann Rosenthal's question. So the Torah tells us that humanity is created in God's image. But the Kabbalistic thinkers went so far as to say it wasn't just humanity that was in God's image, it's the entire world, the entirety of creation is God's image. And so we have to show respect to the entirety of creation and treat each element of that creation, each element of expression of the world around us, as if it is a reflection of the divine. So we have obligations as sentient beings, as beings given the commandment for both rule over the land and to tend and harvest the land, to all aspects of nature. And I think, have steered wrong as a species, and even within the Jewish world, when we adopted the kind of Francis Bacon viewpoint of modernity, that it is ours as humans, based on the King James Bible translation of the book of Genesis, our responsibility to dominate and do violence to nature to subdue it. That is not the way our tradition thinks about it. That is not the way we should be thinking about it today. And unfortunately, the primary modes of behavior in the human world today reflect that viewpoint. So that was one of the, again, if you read the book, this is the foreword that Corinna Gore wrote, is primarily about that shift, as is my introduction. So please do check out the book if you want to see more about that. That was one of the main goals of this book, is to give us a new viewpoint. So thank you all for listening to me for 52 minutes. That is a whole lot of time to listen to me talk. Like I said, you can just go to RabbiAndyKahn.com to either find my socials or to shoot me an email through the form on the webpage if you have any other questions. You can also email me at RabbiAndyKahn@gmail.com. Thank you so much for being here. So good to share with you all. And thank you for your thoughtful questions. And thank you, my Jewish Learning and Mira, for organizing all.